Chapter 1. The Menipens, or the Small Ones, were lost people and lived along the banks of the Watercress River in the land between the mountains. There were 12 villages. The Menipens ran from the mushrooms, or the hairless ones. Gammage was their leader. He carried the cup of wisdom in silk, hung over his shoulder. In Slipper in the Water, Walter the Earl's cottage had the oldest foundation on Slipper on the Water. He was convinced that records of the early ages existed. In the year of gammage, 880, the periods, who were very special, they had special names, they had a special air of dignity, and they held most village offices. They were descendants of Foley. Foley, or Foley the Magnificent, or the Great Foley, sailed over the cliffs of Snowdrift in a balloon. He sailed back 129 days later. When he landed the balloon, it burst and scattered its contents and Foley. He had no recollection of what he saw in the land beyond the mountains. There are 3 Menipens that made Slipper on the Water different. They're known as them. They live alone, they're not married, and they don't have kids. They wear cloaks of different colors, they don't work, and one of them is named Walter the Earl. He digs holes looking for treasure. Curly the Green paints pictures, and Gummy is bone idle, loves childish pranks and rhymes. Now Muggles is not one of them, but she's also not ordinary. She wears an orange sash, she works in the museum, and she's a candy maker. Her house is a mess and is always ready to please. She has good humor and is simple-minded. Muggle startles awake and couldn't figure out why the sun wasn't rising. She looked out her window towards the Sunset Mountains and saw golden fire, only it didn't look like the sun rising. There was something wrong with the way it looked. Suddenly, she saw Gummy outside her window, stumbling along the marketplace towards his cottage, but then decides to go into Walter the Earl's cottage instead. Both Gummy and Walter the Earl stare at the golden lining. Then Gummy and Walter the Earl went back into their own cottages. Muggle stumbles back into her bed and falls asleep, deciding what she saw. When Muggles finally wakes up later that morning, she realizes she has overslept. She was going to be late to the museum, and the mayor, Lit, was coming home. On her way to the museum, Muggle stops and stares at Curly Green's scarlet-red door. Then the door opens and she is face to face with Curly Green. The two make their way towards the museum, having a casual conversation. When Muggles brings up the mountains, Curly Green tells her that Gummy has built himself a house in the mountains. Once Muggles gets to the museum, she opens the blinds and windows and starts to dust everything off. While she dusts everything off, she starts to think of her dream and decides to head over to Walter the Earl's cottage, where she finds Curly Green sitting under a tree painting Muggle's dream from that morning. Then, all of a sudden, Walter the Earl yells that he has found ancient treasure. Chapter 2. Curly Green and Walter the Earl decide that Muggles is okay to know the news of the ancient treasure, and Muggles and Curly Green follow Walter the Earl down into the hole where the treasure is. In the hole, they find swords, scrolls, body armor, and trumpets. The 3 of them suddenly stop when they hear banging, but when they find out it's just Gummy, they all cheer and call for him to come down and check out the things they found. When Gummy tells them that the mayor is almost here, they decide to use the trapdoor to get back to the treasure because Walter the Earl has to fill in the hole that he has created. Chapter 3. 2 hours later, Muggles left her new friends and made her way back to the museum when she saw Wim, the village poet, making his way towards the museum. While Muggles and Wim are talking, Walter the Earl comes in and argues with Wim. Once Wim leaves, Walter the Earl tells Muggles that Foley wasn't the wise man everyone said he was. His balloon was made by the town's toy maker for a fair. Walter the Earl tells Muggles that all this information is from the scrolls he found earlier that day. When they both hear a loud noise outside the museum, they think they had gotten caught about the ancient treasure, but they realize that an announcement of Lit's arrival has been told. Lit would arrive the next day instead of that day, and he was bringing an important announcement. Chapter 4. When Muggles returned home, someone knocked on her door. Mingy the money keeper was on her doorstep to deliver a message from Co. Co wants Muggles to make free candy for the children. Mingy invites himself into Muggles' home, and she offers him dinner. While they are eating dinner, Mingy brings up how Muggles is hanging around with them, and how Wim is saying they should be outlawed. Mingy warns Muggles that she should keep away from them before she gets mixed up into something. Once Mingy leaves, Muggles starts on making the candy for the next day. She decides that gobstoppers are too boring and makes minty pins instead. She molds the candies into shapes like swords and armor. Then she is finished. Muggles decides that one last trip to see Walter the Earl wouldn't be so bad, since she promised to bring him some polish. When Muggles is invited into Walter the Earl's house, he instantly starts explaining all that he has learned from the scrolls. Muggles warns Walter the Earl that Wim wants him to be outlawed and that he should keep his discoveries quiet. Then she tells him what she saw on the mountains that morning, but he isn't listening to her. She ends up leaving Walter the Earl's and goes to find Gummy. When Muggles finds Gummy, he is sitting under a tree writing a new rhyme. Gummy realizes that something is troubling Muggles and asks what's wrong. Muggles starts to tell him about what she saw and realizes that Gummy had told Co what he had seen, and that's why he was so angry that day. When Muggles realizes that her dream wasn't a dream, she comes to the conclusion that there is someone trying to get into the valley, and Gummy confirms that her dream wasn't a dream. Chapter 5. Gummy starts to explain to Muggles why he saw what he saw. He woke up because his roof was leaking. He got up and started a fire to dry him off when he looked out the window and saw flames on the mountain. Then he got into his boat and made his way back to the village. He didn't wake up Cole, because who would want to wake up a beast from its slumber? Muggles becomes hysterical and asks what Gummy is going to do about the situation, and Gummy replies calmly that he already told Co, so what else is there to do? Muggles decided that Gummy should stay awake all night and look for the fires on the mountain, and if he sees them, he has to go straight to Co. Since Muggles didn't trust Gummy to stay awake all night, she stayed up by her window and watched the mountains herself. However, there were no fires on the mountains that night. When Muggles walked out into the marketplace that morning, she was startled when she realized the village children were all gathered around Walter the Earl's, watching him slash the air with a sword from the treasure. The children were shouting to Walter the Earl to tell them more. Muggles was just about to go over to them to tell Walter to be quiet when she was stopped by Finn's voice. He told her to steer clear of him if she was smart. Suddenly, Muggles was beckoned for because they needed string at the dock. When she arrived at the dock, chaos erupted. The banner that was being hung recoiled, and a ladder gave out. Muggles was sent home by Co to change her sash, and when she re-entered the marketplace, she told herself out loud that everything was going to be okay. But then someone responded to her statement, and when she turned around, it was Lit. Once everyone is gathered in the marketplace, Lit makes his important announcement. There will be a contest, village against village, to find the finest village. The winner receives the prize of the Gammage Cup. Chapter 6. Everyone is getting ready for the village inspection. They are cleaning and painting and making their village spectacular. Muggles went off and looked for Gummy, but when she arrived at the riverbank, there was no sight of him. Even his boat was gone. She didn't worry that Gummy was missing. Everyone in the town repainted their doors green, and when Curly Green emerged to paint her door, she painted it scarlet red again. This brought an uproar among everyone. Muggles made her way to the museum, and Walter the Earl burst through the door with information. But with his information also came actions. Walter removed pictures in the museum, and when Co walked in, he was furious. When Muggles left the museum, she saw Gummy in the distance. He fell onto the ground and couldn't get back up. Muggles helped Gummy to her house and wrapped him in her comforter, and he falls fast asleep. Chapter 7. It was fully dark in the village, and Muggles sat by her window and kept watch at the mountains. Suddenly, a small sound made Muggles sit upright. She went to her door and opened it slightly. She saw a cloaked figure hurrying across the square, and Muggles was certain it was Geo, the town painter. When he returned, Muggles closed her door and leaned against it, thinking hard about what she saw. With her lips in a hard line, she lit a candle, gathered up materials, swung her door open, and got to work. Once she finished, she stepped back and admired her work with a smile.
In Chapter 8 of the Gammage Cup, Muggles had painted the door to her house orange. Curly Green had painted hers like every other door. Gummy painted his door yellow. Walter the Earl painted his door bright blue. These were different than all the green doors in the rest of the village. Geo calls a meeting and people are angry. In Chapter 9, there's the meeting and Curly Green feels bad about the door. Muggles says coloring the outside won't change the inside color of all the people, meaning their personalities. Co suggests that they should outlaw these people for changing the color of their door completely different than everybody else in the town. Walter the Earl says they will leave instead. Walter, Gummy, Curly Green, Muggles, and Mingy all leave the town, and Mingy leaves his money box behind. In Chapter 10, they travel together as outlaws, going toward the Sunset Mountains. Most of Muggles' things get thrown out, and she's upset about that. Some villagers give them food and supplies. They leave in 5 boats going to Gummy's stone house. Once they get there, they sleep outside until another house is built because the stone house is too small to fit all of them. In Chapter 11, Muggles takes charge to get things done. Muggles is lonely and continues to think about her life that she left behind. The others made Muggles an orange cloak with her glitter stones they had taken that she had and sewed them into her cloak. In Chapter 12, they finish the stone house. They find a gold nugget, and as they're checking out the old mines, they hear a tapping sound, and the sword glows as they hear the tapping sound. In Chapter 13, Gummy and Muggles go back to get things from Reedy in the town. The town is different. There are less people, the trees are square, and all the children are in school. The townspeople are now fined for idling. A new school in town teaches the children that Muggles and the other outsiders are evil and bad. In Chapter 14, Curly Green, Walter the Earl, and Mingy continue working on the knoll. They discovered that the sword would not cut them as it cut the willow branches they were going to use for the roof. They discovered that they heard a noise as the noise grows closer, the 3 swords they were holding glow. As the noise grows fainter, the sword returns to its ugly black self. In Chapter 15, Muggles and Gummy get to Reedy's. Muggles may have convinced Reedy that there may be danger, but Reedy is uncertain. Lidded invites Muggles and the others to come back, but only after the judges are gone. Muggles gets angry and refuses that they will come back. All the outlaws meet back up. They come to the conclusion that there's something evil around. They don't know whether it's an animal or the mushrooms. They decide together that the evil forces around them are trying to get the gold. The town isn't safe, so they say they must do something. The entire valley is not safe, and the outlaws decide it is up to them to do something to save them. That's it.
All right, go. Okay, so chapter 16 opens with Curly Green, Gumpy, Muggles, and Walter the Earl wondering what kind of creatures are on the mountains. They kept watch over the knoll during the night and all took turns. After their breakfast that morning, they all decided to hold a council of war and decide what the plans should be if the invaders attack the knoll. The plan is that Minji will go alone without a sword to the foot of the mountain, and there Minji should hide on the big rock and wait for the mushrooms to appear. Then Minji will get an idea of what the creatures look like, how many there are, and what weapons they possess, and come back to report. If we can't handle them ourselves, then the group will send for help, he explains at the end of the chapter. Walter the Earl is best at battles, as that is his duty. Gummy is the fleetest and the ablest with his tongue, so he must go to slip around the water for help. Curly Green and Muggles plan to feed anyone who comes from the village and help with the armor. Once Minji is watching for the mushrooms on the rock, he waits for a while. Minji was just beginning to believe that they had imagined the whole affair of the tapping and the sword glow when he saw the first movement on the face of the mountain. A figure appeared at the mouth of the abandoned mine, the same one the outlaws entered just 2 days ago. The mushrooms appeared taller than the Menippins by at least one head, and they wore tight brownish-white clothes that fitted the skin, so that their round bellies bulged as fat as toads. Their heads were hairless and were mushroom-colored. Minji left a note on the rock to show where he was and how many of them there were. There were 200 and coming. The mushrooms then caught Minji. So chapter 17. The rest of the group waited to see Minji. They all thought they saw Minji, but it was all the mushrooms coming down the mountainside. Walter the Earl swung his sword up before him, but yet the blade gave no light. The rest of the outlaws ran down the side of the hill and sped along the Trickle River. The swords then started to turn color. The group could not see the mushrooms more clearly as they advanced. They all reached the side of the mountain, and Gummy kept running in to see if he could get Minji back. They read 3 messages on the rock. Right when the cause is right, meaning the sword glows when there is trouble. Caught, which was left near Minji's green cloak. And finally, mushrooms, fat bellies, tall hairless carry spears, 200 plus and more. They hear me moving and are listening. Big ears, go get army quick. As that was the 3rd message written on the rock. Gummy then appears from out of the tunnel as his yellow cloak appeared. He murmured, "A nothing, a scratch. I only need a little patch," as he tried to save Minji in the cave. Chapter 18. The remaining outlaws got water from the little trickle, and Muggles bound up Gummy's left shoulder with leaves from the nearest tree. They decided Gummy was delirious and could not hold on any longer and do his duty as he promised. The outlaws discovered there was something on the spear, some type of harmful liquid. Walter the Earl then made his way to slip around the water to get some help from the villagers in defeating the mushrooms and getting the supplies needed for battle. Then through the night, Muggles was watching out at the knoll for the mushrooms, and the spear whistled through the doorway. They heard the familiar sound of kin death, as it was the mushrooms. Muggle staggered to her feet and exclaimed that the swords had given no warning. Chapter 19 opens with Walter the Earl paddling well on his way down the little trickle. He felt he should have brought one of the mysterious spears with him to show the mayor. He finally was starting up the street going to the river, and few villagers gave him very brief nods. He then goes to see the mayor and confront Lidded himself and Co., the town clerk. He shouted invaders through the Sunset Mountains and told them they had caught Minji and Gummy lies wounded by their poison spears. Co exclaims that Walter the Earl has gone out of his head, and Lidded questions him about the invaders and if Walter the Earl has truly seen them. Walter the Earl gives them a short description and says they look like mushrooms, great fat bellies and hideous bald heads. Co and Lidded still do not believe him and question his sanity. They keep asking him questions until Walter the Earl discovered they were just humoring him. Walter the Earl then leaves the mayor's home and sees Dingle the miller and singer and has a word with him. Dingle then explains that the mayor is a period and is very wise, so naturally what the mayor doesn't believe he shouldn't believe. And Walter the Earl was busy explaining to Dingle the miller and singer that there's problems, there's invaders about to attack. So then Walter the Earl then saw Spill the candlemaker and tells him he has come for Minju's 3 gold pieces, but Spill will know. But Spill, as we know, does not have the money. Walter the Earl then explains that to Spill if he can rouse the village for him to fight the mushrooms, he will not have to pay gold pieces back. Spill then acts as if he's limping and bawling and crying, tells everyone to gather at Reedy's, wife of Crambo the basket maker and a friend of Muggles before she is outlawed, and exclaims, "Invaders, spread the word, meet at Reedy's." Thumb then overheard and saw Spill and collected people as well, and played his trumpet, and villagers gathered around Reedy's house. Then Walter the Earl waits and enters to talk to all of the villagers. Chapter 20 opens with Minji coming to his senses very slowly. He remembered the hairless ones dancing about him while he was pinned to the rock, and the glimpse of Gummy facing toward him, his sword all but bursting into flame. The mushrooms danced around him and contemplated what they were going to do with him, and then left. Minji then discovered a weird white substance and applied it to his aching body. Minji discovered the white substance could heal him almost immediately and decided to venture off to join the rest of the outlaws. Chapter 21. Walter the Earl is about to make his speech during the opening of this chapter. Everyone is bustling and organizing food and other supplies, while Walter the Earl is deciding what 50 men to bring. All the men lined up, and Lidded said that no period goes on this fool's errand, as Geo and Wim were in line to battle and to get checked to be one of the 50. What you do in the next hour and the next minute means life or death to the whole Minipian race, said Walter the Earl to the periods, and he explained to them that this is do or die. Walter and his army then started toward the knoll, ready for battle. Chapter 22 starts with a Gummy, Curly Green, and Muggles reacting to the sword thrown into the cabin by the mushrooms as they were advancing towards them. Spears kept coming into the cabin, and Gummy leaped for the doorway and snatched the sword from its hanging. Instantly it flamed into blue light and crackled and snapped. Muggles and Curly were defending their home from both sides and covering 2 windows from inside as Gummy tried to recover himself and hold on the door. The chapter ends with the mushrooms closing in on them.
A recap on Chapter 22, the battle upon the knoll of the 3 outlaws. We have Ming, Curly Green, and Gummy. Gummy is sitting in the corner, all healed over from the drug that he was speared with. We have Curly Green covered with a whole bunch of shields that Muggle put on her because she was tapped in the heel by a spear. And then we have Brave Muggle sitting in the corner with the glowing of the sword that was once a dull gray because there was no mushrooms around. She is battling along, keeping them off her friends and her friends to keep them safe. Finally, as they entered into, As they go through the battle, all you hear is Kin death, weak, 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 weak. And those are the mushrooms shooting spears through every doorway and entry that they can. As you see, Curly Green laying on the ground, covered up with the shields. They're glowing from all the mushrooms surrounding the building. Poor Gummy still laid unconscious, drugged up from the spear. Gummy's trying to defend them off from them. Chapter 23. We have Ming, who is in the cave, thinking to himself, will I be eaten, or will I be torn apart by these mushrooms? They kicked and bruised him and led him over. But finally, when he came to, he realized that he was alone in this great giant cave. The smell was just bad. He wasn't sure if he would ever eat a mushroom again, but he thought to himself, I can't go to rescue them. I can't be out there to fight the battle, but what can I do? He thinks to himself, what can I do? And he thinks and he thinks and he realizes he has a plan at hand. He tells himself, I'm going to take this big black pot of cream that they put on me to heal my wound. So he decides to drag all the mushrooms rugs over to the air vent, and he piles them up to the point where he can no longer get any more up there, struggling with them on his hurt ankle that was stuck in the mountain edge. Finally, he decided, all right, it's time. It's time to light these rugs, these mats they lay on. He makes sure that his big pot back of cream is with him by his side. He lights the flame of he lights the rugs up, and all of a sudden smoke starts to come out, and all the smoke has pushed all the rest of the mushrooms back out to store water and the rest of the maintenance that are waiting for them. Cut. Chapter 24. Walter the Earl marches with his army along the little trickle, saving the gnome. All they could hear as they're marching along with his army there, King Death, King Death, King Death. He looks upon the gnome and he realizes there's a bright shining light coming out from the house they just built, the roofless house. He realizes that Muggle, Curly Green, and me, and Curly Green and Gummy are all there by himself, and he tells his army, quick, half of you go this way and the other half go here, and we'll come up the center, but we have to time this just right. So they come to the rescue of Muggle, Curly Green, and Gummy. They fight off the mushrooms as they hear King Death, King Death, King Death, Key, Key, Key. The mushrooms hear the army coming and they take off running to their mountain hole again. But little behold that they know, Ming already started the rugs, so the smoke is going to push them back out. So Rogelot gets to the cabin, the roofless house that they had built on the gnome, and asks, and he looks around and he realizes that Curly Green is covered with the shields guiding over her. The shininess of the sword and the shields have disappeared because the mushrooms have disappeared and all their swords are back to dull gray. We have Gummy still in the corner, all woozy from his drug. Gummy holding on to her last breath with a smile of happiness that she sees them to her rescue. There we go.
So these are the hero steps. The first step is the hero is introduced in the ordinary world. In the story of the Gammage Cup, this is Muggles at the beginning in her bedroom. She's just an ordinary candy maker, and she also works at the museum. The second step is the call to adventure. This is when, in the story, Muggles first sees the fire in the mountains, and also Gummy sees the fire, but she's not really sure if it was a dream or if it was real. She is reluctant at first because, like I said, the dream. And then the third step is Muggles passes the first threshold. This is her going from her comfy bed in the village to the knoll when they are kicked out. Well, not kicked out. They're exiled, I guess, is a good way to put it. This is when they go from the known to the unknown. They don't really know if there's anything out there at this point, They don't know if there's any mushrooms or if the fires are any animals or something. So they're going from the known to the unknown. The fourth step is all of the outlaws encounter tests. This is when they're on the knoll, they don't have a roof, they have to build a new house, they have to find food, they sleep outside, they have to take care of each other.
So step 5 of the hero steps, we have the outlaws reach the innermost cave. So meaning the battle of the mushrooms. It's the highest point. It's climactic. It's exciting. And then number 6, they win and are heroes of the village and town wins the gammage cup, and they are let back into the village. Then step 7, the road back consists of happiness in the village and rebuilding the relationships with everyone accepting them, and then as well as Minji and Muggle's engagement.
3.
The Gammage Cup is a story of bravery, perseverance, and not accepting what may be perceived. Many people can relate to this story as they feel they are made fun of and are accused of being a wrong in character. Gummy, Minji, Walter the Earl, Curly Green are all seen as outcasts in the village of Slipper on the Water. Muggles then speaks to one of them and she is suddenly part of the group. This can easily parallel life today. If an individual is seen talking to others that are supposedly weird, that individual could be cast aside and be considered weird as well. We often see this in schools, communities, and even the workplace. Walter the Earl discovers the truth when he is finding the buried treasure in the iron chest, and ultimately decides he should leave and the outlaws come with him as well, although they are subjected to it at the meeting. This event is the realization that outlaws are not wanted and are dismissed by the periods. This could translate in the real world as individuals leaving the workplace, school, or community due to constant ridicule. When the outlaws are busy working, they are building themselves up again. They are building their positive attitudes and mending to a new life. Like in today's world, this is how people must adjust to a new school or city. Then trouble strikes again in the previous place they were, and the outlaws that were previously hurt by the community have to go back and help the community again, as it happened in the Gammage Cup. In the end, everyone realized